conventional healthcare has it backwards, right? And I just quickly wanted to jump on and share some thoughts. And really, for a practitioner, what has been pivotal for me, right? The changes that I've made in the last few years that have really shifted my approach to health. And I think this is a reflection of the problem of the bigger, medical system at large, is it is so focused on outputs, right? When we understand the way that a system works, and this is really borrowed from systems thinking, right? Every system, whether it's a machine, whether it's a business, whether it's the human body, is made up of 4 parts, right? We have inputs, processes, outputs, and then the environment in which those things are happening, right? So the input is what goes into the system, right? The process is what happens, right? The action points. And then the outputs are really the results that are produced by the system, right? And the environment is where things are happening. In health, these parts exist. But what healthcare kind of does is focuses on almost exclusively on the outputs, right? So I want to kind of break down this idea of inputs, processes, and outputs, and how if we start to look at health through this systems lens, and instead of trying to suppress or manage or remove outputs, right? We'll talk about how conventional medical, healthcare does that. Instead, we're focusing on changing the inputs, right? And by changing the inputs, we get different processes, we have different outputs. So I kind of want to break this down as an example. We'll talk about anxiety. But first, let's kind of break down these components, right? So the outputs, right? In this example, healthcare focuses on symptoms, right? The symptoms are the output of a dysfunctional system. Symptoms aren't the enemy, right? Symptoms are telling us that the body, right, isn't working as well as it could be. Little alarm signals, little, opportunities for course correction. But what conventional healthcare does is focuses on, okay, well, if this symptom is anxiety, if it is pain, if it is any pathology, right, certain blood markers, like how do we get rid of it is the question. Right? And so there's this model of suppression. There's this model of removal. We cut things out. We try to kill things. We're focused on the outputs, failing to recognize that the outputs are just coming from the system, right? So what are the inputs and what are the processes? If we continue to focus on outputs, we're ever playing reactive healthcare, and this is where we're at today, right? The entire medical system is reactive, right? Like, you've got rising blood sugars. Well, you don't yet have diabetes. Once you cross a certain point, oh, now you've got diabetes and we'll treat you for diabetes, right? And by managing the outputs of the system that is dysfunctional. Instead of, what are the inputs causing a change in blood sugar regulation that is leading to this output of diabetes, right? So outputs, symptoms, right? The inputs is really where we want to focus. This is what root cause is. The conventional medical system doesn't really talk about inputs, right? There's so fewer conversations being had, by medical professionals and their clients about sleep, movement, hydration, self-love and self-care, like our emotional state, what's driving our behaviors, self-reflection, these are the kind of inputs to the system. So if we want to create health, right, we have to focus on the inputs, right, that go into this system that create this output that is health, right? So it is by changing the inputs that we actually change the outputs. This is how a system works, okay? So if I'm not sleeping well, right? If I'm chronically stressed, if I'm, I have dysfunctional breathing patterns, I have poor posture, poor movement, lack of movement, poor nutrition, all these things are the inputs to the system, right? When those inputs are out of balance, they create bottlenecks, right? They create dysfunctions in the system. Now the system doesn't work as well, right? And the output, then we get symptoms. So I hope, that this is starting to make sense as we kind of see this flow through. The final thing is kind of the processes that are happening between the inputs and the outputs, right? This is how our body is responding and managing and dealing with the inputs and the environment, right? So the system is working with the environment being our internal environment, thoughts, feelings, emotions, physiology, our chemistry, right? But also the external environment. And that is social, it's relational, that's the environment itself. And so the processes, right, is how the body is responding. And this is, our role as a practitioner. We get to focus on changing the inputs and adjusting the processes, or at least getting feedback, right, and then adjusting the inputs. So our role as practitioners, and the problem with the medical system, is the focus on suppressing symptoms, right? That is just trying to block the outputs and ignore that that is a system that is working or not working very well. And so let's use an example that I work, right, a lot of clients that struggle with anxiety. And the conventional approach, right, the medical system's approach to anxiety is typically to treat the symptom, which is anxiety, with medication. Right? We have anti-anxiety medication, right, to suppress. The output, may temporarily be reduced with medication, right? So this is, if someone takes the medication and it suppresses, right, removes, eliminates their anxiety, but it is doing nothing to address the inputs as to why this system is expressing the symptoms of anxiety. The root cause hasn't changed and it will continue to impact the system. We have just blocked or blunted the output. Not a good idea with the way that systems work, right? It's just going to feed back into the system. And so if we took this kind of systems approach, right, let's think the inputs. Let's chat about your sleep. Let's chat about your exercise. Let's chat about your nutrition. Let's chat about your breathing patterns, your use of screens, how you're managing your nervous system. If we start to adjust these things and we allow the outputs to tell us, right? If you're experiencing less anxiety, well, we made a positive change to the input, right? If your anxiety is worsening, the opposite. So we're using this idea of changing inputs, reading outputs, feedback into the system to make it work better. So we're not wanting to suppress the anxiety. We're wanting to ask why it's there. Really big, huge distinction. Yes, anxiety is not fun, right? Like, I'm not saying that we want to, embrace the anxiety, but what the anxiety is telling us is the system isn't working. So you need to identify either the environment or the inputs, right? And so then I can go back and think, well, what would happen if I stopped using my phone for an hour before bed and an hour after I woke up? I've changed an input, right? My nervous system, the processes, is going to change in response to that. Maybe I feel less anxious because I'm actually managing my nervous system. And so this systems approach isn't about eliminating the symptom. It's about changing the conditions that caused it to emerge in the first place, right? We can apply that same level of thinking to health, right? Health is an output of a system, or it's an emergence from a system. So we need to get the inputs right, the processes right, and the outputs take care of themselves. Right? The Western medical model views the human body as broken, right? Like it's something that needs to be fixed, and our big old human brains have decided we're so smart that we're smarter than nature and biology and evolution, and we think we need to change things and block things, and instead we need to deepen our connection with what our body is telling us and allow that to inform a change in our actions, our behaviors, so that we start to optimize the functioning and support the functioning of the system itself. So I think it's time we really stop chasing symptoms and start focusing on systems. And that's a big part of what's changed my approach to health, right? And therefore the outcomes that my clients see. And it's also what I teach all of the practitioners that come through our program. It's such a simple but huge shift in the way you're looking at health, right? Treating pathology, symptoms, right? This output, or creating and supporting health, right? Managing inputs and processes and environment. So I hope you can take, right, this level of thinking or this type of thinking and apply it, right? Just look at a couple of situations or examples of where this maybe is coming into play in your practice, and that way you can start to see how systems thinking works. Peace.